Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of July the 12th and 13th, 2025. So the main focus of this video is going to be, what's going on over the weekend. And I'll be looking at the 12 signs, and also I'll be doing an I Ching reading for the weekend. But there are a couple of specific issues I want to focus on at the end of the video. One issue is the fact that Saturn is going stationary retrograde over the weekend, and this is an important event. Last weekend we had Neptune going stationary retrograde, and now Saturn is joining it. So we've got this Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Both are now retrograde, and we need to consider, what does that mean? And additionally, a couple of days ago, there was an assassination in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine. A colonel in Ukraine's security organization, the SBU, was gunned down. It was apparently a professional hit. It was, with a silencer. Apparently there were 5 shots, and the general view seems to be, the Russians must have been involved. It could have been someone else. It could have been some sort of internal rivalry in Ukraine within the SBU or within the Ukrainian government. But we do have an exact time for this shooting, because we can look at the CCTV footage, and the CCTV footage is all over the place, and we do have a date of birth for the victim. His name is Colonel Ivan Voronych, and apparently he was quite an important figure involved in the first department of the SBU's 16th Directorate. That sounds rather Soviet, doesn't it? Anyway, he was shot, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to look at his horoscope, look at what was going on astrologically at the time of the assassination, and see how that relates to the horoscope of the Ukraine, and perhaps the horoscope of the SBU, and also the horoscope of the FSB, which is the Russian successor organization to the KGB. So there are a few charts we can look at the end of the video. But now, first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for the weekend. So here is the chart for the weekend. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. And so this weekend, the moon is in Aquarius. So this chart is set for midnight on Sunday the 13th, and there's the moon at 19 Aquarius. So pretty much for all of the weekend, the moon is moving through this sign, and there's not actually a huge amount of action over the weekend. So, on Saturday, we've got the moon making a trine to Venus. There is Venus in Gemini. I've got Venus on my sun. So my sun is at 8:13 Gemini. So as I go into the weekend, I've got Venus transiting my sun. I don't know what that means. I haven't really thought about it. But it's a trine. It's not a trine. No, it's a conjunct. Yeah, it's conjunct my sun. Yeah, so that's... just haven't noticed that before. One does miss these things. And so with the moon making a trine to Venus, that should be fortunate. Although we do have to also remember it's making an opposition to Mercury. So moon trine Venus should be quite good for relationships, for getting on with people. It's not necessarily a very exciting aspect, and it's in air signs, so it could be about talking, conversation, perhaps also thinking. And then moon opposition Mercury. Well, that could be problematic. Moon in Aquarius opposition Mercury in Leo. Some people have egos. Their egos want to be flattered and boosted, yet moon in Aquarius can be rather detached, and so moon opposition Mercury might indicate some kind of communication issue. So that's certainly a possibility that we do need to consider. Then, as we move into Sunday, the moon, of course, moves into late Aquarius. It doesn't move into Pisces until Monday if you're not in the Americas. Now, if you are in the Americas, then late afternoon, early evening on Sunday, the moon will move into Pisces. So that could well bring a change of emphasis. But I think for most of us, we can regard it as being a moon in Aquarius weekend. And also on Sunday, Saturn goes stationary retrograde. Now, I don't know if we're going to feel that straight away. I mean, we could. I mean, if you remember last weekend, we had Neptune going stationary retrograde. I think. Well, in fact, it was on a Friday. It was July the 4th that Neptune went stationary retrograde. And in retrospect, it seems to me pretty clear that Neptune going stationary retrograde was. Was it the 4th? Yeah, it was. It was the 4th or the 5th, depends on where you were. So Friday or Saturday of last weekend, Neptune did go stationary retrograde, and the big event of last weekend was, of course, the floods in central Texas, and I feel fairly confident that it was really about Neptune. Neptune was a real trigger there. You sometimes think with planets going retrograde, but it's sort of a general thing. But it may actually be, very precise. And Neptune was on the United States' IC, and that is, I'm afraid, a perfect significator of a devastating flood, and I perhaps should have picked up on that. No, in fact, I should have picked up on it. I didn't. And so Saturn is now in the same area. Is that going to say something about the United States? It could well do. With Saturn, you don't think about floods. You might think about something else. And so one way of looking at that Saturn going stationary is to look at America and to look at what are the foundations of America. And of course, last weekend with Neptune going on the IC, we were talking about the very literal foundations. Where is the bank? Where is the river? Neptune, signifying a river rising. 26 feet in 45 minutes. So Saturn may bring about an event quickly, but of course now that we're all focusing on it, now everyone knows that Saturn's going retrograde. Perhaps nothing will happen. So that's a weekend, and I would emphasize that in terms of immediate aspects, there isn't necessarily a great deal going on, but maybe Saturn retrograde is important, and that could signify something. And what does it mean for us, Saturn going retrograde? Well, later in the video, I'm going to be talking in detail about Saturn retrograde and what it might mean. So that is a picture for New York. If we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, that's a heliocentric picture. Where has it gone? Sydney, Australia. There it is. So it's not so different. The moon is still in Aquarius. The moon trine Venus may be more prominent in Australia than in the Americas. And that's because in the Americas, the moon trine Venus was kind of at the beginning of a weekend. Moon trine Venus in Australia and New Zealand is right in the middle of a weekend. So it could be a pleasant weekend up to a point, but as in the Americas, we mustn't forget that the moon is opposition Mercury. So moon opposition Mercury can be about a mismatch, particularly a communication mismatch, when we aren't necessarily able to say what we mean, or our words might get misinterpreted. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. And so as far as what is happening, there's the Earth at 21 Capricorn, and the Earth is starting to make a square to Chiron. So Chiron is at 23 Aries, 23, 24 Aries. So over the next couple of days, into early next week, Earth square Chiron. And for some of us, we might feel sorry for ourselves. We might be very aware of what's gone wrong in the past, perhaps some distant wound that feels very real and very present. Although an alternative approach is to say, well, Earth square Chiron, we've got to do something. We've got to do something different. We've got to, display our individuality. So that might be something that we're really thinking about. We don't want to just follow the crowd. We want to be different. And that reminds us that Chiron isn't just about the wounded healer. It's about the maverick wanting to stand out. And at the same time as this, we have what do we have? We have Venus making a sextile to Pluto. So there is Venus at sort of 1 degree Aries, heliocentric, making a sextile to Venus. So making a sextile to Pluto and making a conjunction to Neptune. So Neptune, is linked. So Venus is linked with the Neptune-Pluto sextile, and so that might be about tuning into something which is maybe beyond ourselves. And Venus conjunct Neptune, who are we mixing with? Venus conjunct Neptune can be very confusing, and it may not always be easy to tell what someone is like, and there may be conflicting messages there. But it is sextile Pluto, so perhaps Venus conjunct Neptune is, we may be able to mislead in a gentle way, and by misleading we might be able to seize the initiative. Venus sextile Pluto, so we don't have to be completely overt in how we present ourselves, and there may be value in keeping some things hidden. So that's a heliocentric view, and now I want to consider things from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of July the 12th and 13th, 2025. Aries. Aries, you are in the centre of things to some extent. You're relatively confident, and I think that you should have little difficulty getting on with other people. You'll know what to say, you'll know what not to say, and you can keep sufficient distance. You don't have to keep complete distance, but if you want to be sociable, you don't want to be in a situation where you're spending too much time with any one person, because that would be denying you other opportunities. So it's important to make sure that you keep your options open, and you always got one eye on the exit, because if you can't see the exit, you might get stuck, and you might find that one particular social scene or even just one particular person just becomes too much of a good thing. So it is always important to keep your options open and not feel that you are stuck. And talking about stuckness, we have Saturn going stationary retrograde, and of course Saturn is in your sign, and Saturn is quite a heavy influence, and so if Saturn is stationary retrograde, you might really start to feel its influence, feel what it means. And Saturn can represent a force or a principle which can be quite restrictive. You've got your freedom, but you are aware that something is trying to hold you back. And the question is, what is it? Is it another person? Or is it just a set of responsibilities? And, although it is the weekend, you might be aware of responsibilities that you just can't avoid. That might be responsibilities to your family. It could also be responsibilities your work or to your ambitions. Ambitions bring responsibility. We can create our own responsibility. And when we think about responsibility and obligation, we often think about what other people are expecting us to do. But sometimes we create structures in our life and we create routines, and we get tied to these routines and we can't escape them. And so that might be what it's about. So if you feel that you are stuck, that there are not so many options, it just might be that it is something that you've created, and maybe you've created it for a good reason. So just because something is restrictive, doesn't mean that you should run away from it. Maybe you just need to be a little less extreme, and also you may have responded to Saturn moving into Aries in a particular way, and you immediately felt that something had changed and you had to adapt to this change, and you just could have overreacted. And so with Saturn starting to go retrograde, and Saturn does in the end leave Aries and move back into Pisces. Of course, next year it will return to Aries and it will stay there for a year or two. But for the moment, just consider the possibility, Aries, that you have exaggerated something, that you've over-restricted yourself and you've created obligations that maybe are necessary. Okay, they might be necessary up to a point, but you don't want to exaggerate. And you have to remember who you are. You are an Aries. You need your freedom. And then, going back to the moon being in Aquarius, the moon does make a trine to Venus. So moon trine Venus, it's an aspect that's going to be especially strong on Saturday, and I would have said that in the main it's a pretty fortunate influence, and it says something about your ability to get on with people. And also it says something about how people respond. Some people are going to respond really well to you, and they might sort of give you the variety that you're looking for. And that's what you want. Variety does matter, and possibly with this trine between the moon and Venus, it may indicate that it's not just about one person, it's about perhaps a couple of other people who you could really benefit by spending time with them. And this moon trine Venus allows things to sort of run quite smoothly, though don't say more than you have to. It's not about explaining everything in precise detail, and it's certainly not about being excessively critical, because the moon is making an opposition to Mercury, and so with moon opposition Mercury, there is some danger that someone says something that is insensitive. It could be you, it could be someone else. And in terms of your own sensitivity, there are some things, Aries, that you regard as being very important, fundamental to who you are, and they're not negotiable. And so if anyone tries to negotiate them or suggests that maybe you should change your approach, or maybe you should spend less time on one thing, more time on something else, if you get that kind of criticism and commentary, then you might not take kindly to it. So, don't overreact to what people say, even if you disagree with them, even if you feel that they are paying insufficient attention to you and who you are. There's no need to overreact. You have to be able to put up with other people's frailties to some extent. Taurus, this weekend, there are possibly things you want to continue with. You perhaps had started certain activities on Friday, or it may not have been activities, it might be trains of thought, and you kind of wanted to continue with these trains of thought. They were not just interesting, but also they were useful, and you were thinking, well, this might be a pointer to the future. And you recently had the moon conjunct Pluto. I think the moon conjunct Pluto was on Friday. That aspect could have been Friday, early Saturday. That moon conjunct Pluto was quite motivating, and so you started the weekend feeling motivated, and you didn't want to waste the opportunities, and that's possibly how you should see it, especially on Saturday, because on Saturday we have got a trine between the moon and Venus. So a moon-Venus trine sounds very pleasant and sort of easygoing, and it is, but in your case, with your chart, this moon trine Venus does have a serious edge. It's serious because it's reminding you of what you can do and what you can create and what you can get off the ground. So if there is something you want to do and it matters to you, it could be related to your ambitions, it could possibly have a financial dimension. If there's something you want to get going on, then do get going on it. It's not going to be as difficult as you'd imagine, because it's a trine. And so if you want to do something practical on Saturday, I think that it's okay. People aren't going to mind. In fact, in most cases, they're going to be fairly cooperative. So especially on Saturday, do what you feel is necessary, and there's absolutely no need to apologize. And one thing, though, the moon does make an opposition to Mercury, and so with that moon opposition Mercury, not everyone is going to be appreciative of what you're trying to do, and I'm thinking particularly of your family. Your family might have something to say. Your family might not be happy with some of your plans. They've got other ideas, and you shouldn't treat it as a conflict situation. I mean, a moon opposition Mercury, it's a short-lived aspect, and sometime over the weekend, you and your family might not see eye to eye, but just don't exaggerate. And then we have got Saturn going retrograde. Now, the Saturn going retrograde, it's important for all of us. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who we are. It is a major event, and it's especially major this weekend because there's not really a great deal else going on. So, how might Saturn going retrograde work out? In your case, and there may be quite an unconscious element to Saturn going retrograde. Things shifting. You might, for example, wake up and you've had a dream, and the dream is indicating that a reality has changed, something has changed. And sometimes that's how dreams work. We know something consciously, but we haven't really got it at all levels. And we dream something, and it's just obvious. It's absolutely obvious, the way things are going. We see the truth of the matter. So that might be how it works. I mean, of course, not everyone has vivid dreams. Not everyone remembers their dreams. But that is one possibility of how Saturn retrograde, how Saturn going retrograde might have an impact on you. It might also have an impact on your ideas about yourself and where you want to go to and your ambitions. Now, I've already said that this weekend your ambitions could be quite important for you, in an immediate way, but on a more sort of long-term level, with Saturn going retrograde, you might have this niggling feeling that some of your ambitions need to be fine-tuned. But you're not quite so sure. You thought you knew, but now you have to question things. And this process of questioning is actually quite good. And it allows you to do things in your own way, not to be influenced by other people, by sort of external expectations, because that's always the problem. You can have ambitions which are not really your ambitions. They're often someone else's ambitions. And so perhaps with Saturn going retrograde, you can think again about what you want. And it's not that you have to make any decisions immediately, but it just might be a process lasting a couple of months, maybe even until next year, where you start to question things. And it's not that any ambition has to be thrown out, but it might just be about some fine-tuning. Gemini, you don't have to be satisfied with what's in front of you. There's always more going on, and so it's a good idea to discover what is happening out there, and the concept of variety really is important. I mean, it's important especially if you're a Gemini, and over the weekend there are lots of interesting things to discover. You don't necessarily have to go anywhere to make these discoveries. It's right in front of you if you just open your eyes. But the problem with making discoveries is that sometimes they can be challenging. Geminis like to think of themselves as really open-minded people who are into sort of big concepts. That can be a Gemini fantasy. And, I'm speaking as a Gemini and with my sun in Gemini. And one problem that Geminis can have is that they actually find it quite difficult to think about the broader picture. They like to break things down. Breaking things down is an important way of being sometimes for Gemini, splitting things. And so you have these things that individually you regard as being important. You can feel that they're important, but actually seeing the big picture can be hard work if you're a Gemini. It's kind of much easier if you're a Sagittarius. And this issue might matter over the weekend. You might be very comfortable with blocks of information that you have real expertise about. You really know it. You feel you know it. You needn't be worried about being contradicted. But how do you fit it all together? And it's a challenge. And it's actually quite annoying if you think about it, because you want to fit it together. You want to just have a broad concept, a broad philosophy, a broad sense of meaning and purpose, but it's just hard work making all the connections. And so with this moon opposition Mercury, there may be moments of frustration, and it could be frustration with other people, and you may find yourself being challenged. You may find that you have to defend some things that you regard as being important. Are you going to be challenged by other people? It's possible. But you could be challenged by what you discover. And sometimes it's best, or it might feel best, to just stop trying to explore, because if you keep exploring, you're always going to find something in the end that just contradicts everything you were working on. And that can be a Gemini issue. You make one realization too many and everything collapses. But you shouldn't be afraid of realizations, and you shouldn't. But then you shouldn't over exaggerate. I think that is important. Now, one thing going on this weekend is that Saturn is going stationary retrograde. Saturn comes to a standstill. And with Saturn going retrograde, or starting to go retrograde, you might have questions. Things have been moving in a particular direction for the last couple of months, and also maybe since, last 6 weeks, maybe you were reaching some conclusions, And now with Saturn going retrograde, well, you're not quite so sure. And you're thinking, well, you thought you wanted something, but do you really want it? And you might then be thinking that actually you maybe need to think about the whole thing again. And this might also relate to other people. You're thinking about who you're spending your time with. And with Saturn going retrograde, you might be thinking that maybe you're spending your time with the wrong people, or spending too much time with one person, not enough time with another person. So Saturn going stationary retrograde might bring about some questions, and in the end you might feel that you have to go back to the drawing board. It's not like abandoning anything absolutely, but in a couple of months' time, as you move into the autumn, you might have to revisit some of your ambitions and some of the things that you've been working on. You thought you'd sorted it out, but it's just something that needs to be tweaked. So I don't think that the Saturn going stationary retrograde need be a major dramatic event, but still it does raise some questions about some of your hopes. You'd started to hope for something, and you thought that was the right thing to hope for. You thought you knew where you were going in terms of a future, but now you have questions. And of course Gemini always has questions, and it just might be that you have one thought too many, but you shouldn't be afraid of having one thought too many. And the ultimate aim of every Gemini should almost be to be able to switch into a Sagittarian mode, because when you're looking at every sign, you should be considering its opposite. So when you're thinking about Gemini, you should be aspiring in some respects to Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is about making all the connections, being able to fit everything together, and understanding the broader picture which individual facts are leading to. Cancer. This weekend you are relatively serious. You know that some things can't be trivialized, and you have a particular approach, and you're not necessarily in the mood for sharing it. You don't always have to share, and being a Cancer, you understand your limits and you understand your vulnerabilities. And I actually think that at the moment, Cancer, you are very aware of what makes you vulnerable, and it's good to be aware of what makes you vulnerable, because it gives you resilience, and at the same time it allows you to avoid difficult situations. If something has been problematic in the past, well, then it's quite likely to be problematic in the future. And so, this weekend, if you can take a serious approach and not trivialize things, then you should be okay, and it will be appreciated, especially on Saturday. On Saturday, we've got the moon making a trine to Venus. Moon trine Venus is it's a great aspect, and it allows you to understand people. You can get on with them as well, up to a point. I don't think that you are wildly sociable. You're not in the mood for taking social risks, but you know how to present yourself. You know how to make people happy. You know how to talk to people, but in such a way that you don't give too much away. And that really is important. So this weekend, you are aware of what's happening around you. You're aware of all the social pressures, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give in to them. Now, one aspect we do have over the weekend is an opposition aspect between the Moon and Mercury, and this aspect is across the finance axis of your chart, and it might say something about money. It could say something about money and how you relate to it and how you discuss it. If you discuss money with another person, then the conversation may not go in quite the way you were expecting, or it's possible that money just crops up. You thought you were talking about one thing, and then suddenly money is there. And as soon as money is on the table, or at least the issue of money is on the table, then things could get complicated, and there may be disagreements. So handle money with caution, not because I don't think you're going to lose money or make financial mistakes. I mean, you could, but I think that's unlikely. I think it's more about realizing that your ideas about money and other people's ideas are not necessarily the same, and potentially, there could be a conflict. Now, one event we do have this weekend is Saturn going stationary retrograde, and it arguably is the main event of the weekend. And London time, Saturn goes retrograde. I think it's at 5:08 in the morning on Saturday. On Sunday. I mean, I don't think the precise time actually matters. Even on Saturday, you're going to feel Saturn starting to come to a standstill, and Saturn goes retrograde in quite an important part of your chart. Aries is a high-profile sign. It's an angular sign, and Saturn is, of course, ruler of your 7th house as well. So Saturn going retrograde can have an impact on career, your work, and on other people and how you get on with other people. And when you're dealing with an aspect like Saturn retrograde, for most people, it's going to work on a psychological level rather than an actual physical, tangible level. But, one can sort of lead to another. And so, it could be about second thoughts and you perhaps looking at the way your work is going, if appropriate, if you have a job or if you have a career, the way it's going, and starting to think about it again. And you've seen what's happened over the last 6 weeks, and you've made some progress, and you have perhaps been more serious than you have been of late. But now you're asking, where is it going? How is it manifesting? And don't forget, Saturn is pretty close to a conjunction of Neptune. And if you're honest with yourself, you might not be sure. And it might bring about a period of uncertainty. And probably psychological uncertainty, like, between now and next year, the next maybe 6 months, maybe longer, you just may not be sure. And that doesn't say that anything's going to go wrong. But it's about you, Cancer, asking yourself whether you're doing the right thing and whether you're going in the right direction. And talking about uncertainty might also sort of spill over into the area of relationships, because if Saturn's going retrograde, it might be that another person is just not sure. They're indecisive, and they might, for example, have made commitments and they might want to get out of those commitments, and because things are changing, things are starting to change. So be aware of other people's uncertainties and try to understand them, and perhaps try to talk about them. I'm not saying you have to talk about them this weekend. This weekend is Moon opposition Mercury. Probably not the best time to be having serious conversations, but still, do understand that things are changing, and what seemed to have been sort of written in stone over the last 6 weeks may not be quite as permanent as it looks. And so a bit of questioning, a few second thoughts, might well be in order. Leo, right now the moon is in Aquarius. So, with the moon in Aquarius, we think about relationships, other people, what are people doing? and what people are doing, might have an influence on you, and it might be just something that is, quite difficult to ignore. And you shouldn't feel that, it's always down to you to take the initiative and to make the decisions. Sometimes it's best to just, let other people take the lead, see where things are going. You can follow their lead if you want to, but you certainly don't have to. And in fact, right now, Leo, you could actually be quite conflicted. You certainly understand that other people have their ideas, that perhaps other people want to do things their way, but also Mercury is in Leo, Mercury is in your sign, and so with Mercury in Leo, you have your pride, and there are certain things you really believe in, and sometimes what you believe in is not the same as what other people believe in. And so with Moon opposition Mercury, there could be a disagreement, or just an awareness that where someone else wants to go to is not where you want to go to. So the question is, what do you do? I don't think you want to have a real confrontation about it. If possible, you should try to be flexible. Try to go along with someone as far as you can, simply because it's good to be open-minded. You haven't got all the answers, although there may come a point where you do understand what's going on, and you might absolutely know, for example, that someone has got it wrong, and that you don't want to follow someone forever. You might be following them off a cliff, but I'm not saying that's going to happen. But give people a chance, and give people the benefit of the doubt, but up to a point. Always be questioning, and it may reach a stage when you have to back off, and maybe you need to persuade other people to back off as well. And the Moon in Aquarius does make a trine to Venus, and this trine to Venus is especially strong on Saturday, and I would regard this aspect as quite favourable, and it's favourable for you. And it, again, it does emphasise other people and what influence they can have on you, and it does actually indicate that some people really can have a fortunate influence. You've got to perhaps choose carefully. You can't assume that everyone is going to work in a way that is in your favour. Some people should be avoided, but the right people with Moon trine Venus can really move you forward and can help you to enjoy the weekend. So actually, there's no reason why it can't be a great weekend. Especially on Saturday. Now on Sunday, we have Saturn going stationary retrograde. So Saturn going stationary retrograde might say something about certain other people. It might indicate someone changing their mind, or it could be about you changing your mind about another person, and not necessarily changing your mind in an absolute instant way. It might begin a process of changing your mind, and this process could actually be quite long lasting, could last for months. And so the process by which you reconsider another person and their role in your life is not short. And so you have to be open-minded, and it could go in several different ways. You might be looking at someone who you thought was really important to you. You thought they could be trusted, and you're realizing it's not necessarily the case. On the other hand, it could be someone who you took an opposite view of. You were of the view that they were of no help. You didn't want anything to do with them, but now you're seeing another side to their personality, and maybe this person could be part of your life. So, with Saturn starting to go retrograde, don't necessarily have fixed views about other people. It's easy to have fixed views, but sometimes it's just not helpful, and you have to allow people to develop and see what they're doing, and judge people not on what you believe and what you think, but judge people on their actions, and don't even necessarily judge them on their words, because words can be pretty temporary. Yeah, that's what you do. So you judge people on their actions. You observe them over the next few months, and then you may be able to make a decision. Virgo, this weekend you may realize that you have to do stuff, and probably it can only be done by you. If you allow other people to do it, then things might go wrong. There might be disagreements. After all, you have a clear idea about how something should be done, and it's very difficult to transmit that idea. You can try to give instructions. Your instructions might seem clear, but even then the instructions might be disregarded. And so perhaps this weekend the lesson is that only you can do it. Other people might be able to help in theory, but they would need to be closely monitored. And so it might be better if you do everything yourself. If you're not happy about something, you don't have to make a public fuss about it. You just quietly get on with resolving the problem. And if you want to see the issue sort of symbolized astrologically, well, you can see it as Moon opposition Mercury. That's one of the main aspects of the weekend, and of course Mercury is your ruler, Mercury in Leo, and it is potentially a stressful aspect, and it can make you annoyed and can make you annoyed with other people. And so ideally, Virgo, you want to put yourself in a position where no one can be blamed except for you. And so if you are able to do that, then this weekend there is a lot you can resolve. And if something does go wrong, or you feel you haven't quite made the mark, well, it's your responsibility, and then you can make sure that you put in the extra work and complete whatever needs to be completed. Though the Moon's opposition Mercury isn't the only aspect involving the Moon, there is a trine. Moon does make a trine to Venus, and this Moon trine Venus it's especially strong at the beginning of a weekend, and this trine isn't so bad from a social perspective. You can relate to other people, provided there's a purpose. This Moon trine Venus is not about just getting on with people for the sake of it. There's nothing superficial about it. And if you and someone else are on the right wavelength, when you've got a shared sense of purpose, then maybe you can accomplish quite a lot. And remember that the Moon trine Venus happens before Moon opposition Mercury, so there's a sequence there. So first, Moon trine Venus, perhaps you and another person can cooperate and things are working well. Then Moon opposition Mercury, the cooperation maybe starts to break down, and so make sure that your social activities are just concentrated at the beginning of a weekend. And once you've done something constructive, once you and another person are working well together, wrap it up quickly, and then just move on to something else, and don't create a situation where you might be disappointed with another person's actions, responses, and reactions. And so, by Sunday, ideally, Virgo, you'll be doing things, in your own way. And there may be, things you have to resolve privately, and you don't want anything in the way of interference. I mean, after all, Saturn is going stationary retrograde, and with Saturn going stationary retrograde, that could be quite delicate. It might have an emotional nature, things that you want to work through in your own way, and develop your emotions, and also realizing that there are things you need to discover, and you might have thought you'd discovered them, but actually you haven't. You've only discovered part of a picture, and perhaps you need to take things a bit further. And so, so overall, Virgo, it's probably a fairly serious weekend. I mean, I believe there's a lot you can do, and you can even get help right at the beginning of a weekend. But if you leave it too long, if you take a situation which is going well, you're getting on with people, but you think you can see it through the whole weekend, then I think you might be disappointed. So in the end, you have to take responsibility, and you have to sort of rely on your own resources. Libra, the moon is making a trine to Venus on Saturday, and this moon trine Venus is in air signs, moon in Aquarius, Venus in Gemini, and so this inevitably has a favourable role to play in terms of your sign. So you're helped by moon trine Venus, you're elevated by it, and I think that especially on Saturday, you are on good form. Things seem to be flowing, and your ability to get on with other people should be pretty good. So that Libran sociability is going to be very much emphasized, and so if there's anything you want to do, you feel that you haven't been able to do it, then now might be your chance. But do get going on Saturday. Don't put your focus on Sunday. If you were to put your focus on Sunday, then things might not work out quite so well. And also this weekend, quit while you're ahead. And so if you're doing something, especially with other people, that you're really enjoying, and you feel that things really are working, then that's the moment to leave. Leave when you're feeling on best form, because if you just keep going, then in the end the pace will start to flag, and irritations might come to the surface. So be prompt about things, and don't think that just everything is going to last forever. And it's not just that we've got an opposition aspect between the moon and Mercury. We also have Saturn going stationary retrograde. Now, Saturn going stationary retrograde is potentially a big deal, because Saturn has been in Aries, your opposite sign, for a bit of time. I think Saturn went into Aries. I think that was the end of May, wasn't it? But Saturn went into Aries. So yeah, that was the end of May. Was it around the 25th of May? So you've had it there for over 6 weeks, and with Saturn going into Aries, relationships, or some relationships, could have become more important, or could have taken up more of your time, or alternatively you could have been aware that really you weren't alone, and that there were outside factors that you really had to consider. But now Saturn's going retrograde. And in fact, Saturn will leave Aries and go back into Pisces later in the year. And so with Saturn going retrograde, there may be questions. There may be questions about your relationship with certain people, perhaps what you've committed yourself to. And, Librans can be quick to make commitments, but, once they've made a commitment, they often are looking for a way to get out of it. And they can be quite versatile in that way. And so with Mercury going stationary retrograde, you may just feel that certain commitments are just too much, and you're looking for a way to get out of them. And if you're on the verge of signing something or making an agreement or making a commitment with Saturn going stationary retrograde, that might not necessarily be a good thing to do, because circumstances change. You make a decision on the basis of certain premises, and you make these premises, but then things change, the premises change, and the whole basis for a decision changes as well. So with Saturn going retrograde, you very much need to be aware of that, and you should always be asking questions of yourself about what other people mean and how relationships are going to develop in the future. And so you don't feel that you're tied to any one course of action. And as far as this weekend is concerned, perhaps at some stage you should actually be de-emphasizing relationships and asking yourself, what is important to you. And once you realize what's important to you, then at some stage you'll be able to make good decisions. And on a slightly different note, in fact maybe a completely different note, some Librans this weekend may be worrying about external power, external forces. And this might be about the government. What can governments do? What can government agencies do? And it might well be that you are looking at something, maybe it's YouTube, something else on social media that is scaring you. It's easy to be scared, and I'm not talking about just you. All of us. It's easy to be scared, and there are people trying to create fear. And at the moment, Libra, you may feel very aware of how things could change in your life as a result of external intervention, perhaps from some government agency, and so don't frighten yourself too much, and try to be realistic about it. And on a positive note, talking about governments and agencies, it's possible that governments can actually work for you. Now that might sound impossible, but it might be because you understand at some level how government departments, local city departments, how bureaucracies work. And I know it's a weekend. Bureaucracies go to sleep over the weekend, but still you can be thinking about it over the weekend. And where there's a fear, there might in fact be a power. So Libra, be aware of that and don't feel powerless. And there's absolutely no need to be afraid, because things are going to be okay. And you also need to get a perspective. Some people are trying to make you afraid because it's their business to do that. And if it's YouTube or some social media, they want your attention because it makes them feel good. But you have to think about yourself and what you can do and your own power and your own agency. And if you get it right, I do think that there are ways in which you can empower yourself, and it's not just about this weekend, it's about how you move into next week. And so it's possible from a bureaucratic point of view, but there's something you're trying to organize, something you're trying to arrange. You're perhaps afraid of arranging it, but if you actually do what's necessary, then you can actually put yourself on pretty secure footing. Scorpio, there is arguably not a huge amount going on this weekend for anyone. It's not a busy weekend. Okay, we've got Saturn going stationary retrograde. Saturn does go stationary retrograde. It happens. It happens every year. So in itself, it's not necessarily a spectacular event. I mean, I do think it's actually important. And I think that later in the video, I'll be looking at Saturn going stationary retrograde in some detail, not in huge detail, but it doesn't need to be crucial. It doesn't need to be crucial for you. And so Scorpio, as far as this weekend is concerned, you probably don't have to do anything. Not if you don't want to. And Scorpio is, of course, a very stubborn sign. Once it's made a decision, it likes to hold firm, and that is certainly something you can do. And so one approach, Scorpio, is to just close everything down, not feel that you have to be anywhere, and you might be able to get away with it, though there's probably going to be some external pressure. I mean, the moon is making an opposition to Mercury, and so moon opposition Mercury could be just something just annoying that you have to deal with. You don't want to deal with it. It may come in the form of a message or a phone call. You're asked something, you don't want to respond, but you have to respond, and it's probably a situation where the quicker and more promptly you sort it out, then the quicker you can move on to something else. In fact, do you have to move on to anything else? You can just be yourself, and you shouldn't feel too much pressure. It is that kind of weekend if you want. Now, if you are looking for variety and excitement, you can certainly find it. You're very aware of your surroundings right now. I mean, Scorpios very often are aware of their surroundings, at least on an emotional level. And, when you look at your surroundings, you can see how things can change. And it may occur to you that something is about to change. And no one else sees it, but you see it. And it's perhaps connected with that Scorpio sensitivity. You can see that something is not going to last forever. In fact, you see that it would be undesirable for some things to last forever, because the word transformation is often used when describing Scorpio. It's often a key word for helping one learn astrological meanings. Normally you associate the word transformation with Pluto, but I think you can also associate it with Scorpio. And there is that association also between the planet Pluto and Scorpio. And so Scorpio, if you become aware that a change is happening and that a change is needed, then maybe you can start to align yourself to it. Now, one aspect we do have is Moon trine Venus. Now, Moon trine Venus is especially strong at the beginning of a weekend, on Saturday. And Moon trine Venus can allow you to understand another person. You don't necessarily have to be close to this other person, but you can understand them. So if there's someone who is a mystery, who you don't necessarily want to get close to them, but you certainly want to understand what they're all about, perhaps you want to make a decision about them, you want to know whether to trust them, then the information is very much available for you if you look for it. So on Saturday you might want to meet someone or talk to someone, and your motive is very simple. You want to know whether this person can be trusted. I mean, that might not even be your motive, but conversation is going to yield so much information that it's going to really help you make decisions. And the moon, having made a trine to Venus, makes an opposition to Mercury, and it's important to get the chronology there. Moon trines Venus, then the moon makes an opposition to Mercury. Moon trine Venus is by and large a pretty fortunate aspect, and then it moves to an opposition to Mercury, which is not quite so fortunate. It can be quite stressful, and so do understand people, but don't comment. There's no need to comment. I mean, you might like to comment, you might even like to criticize, but it's not worth it. There will just come a point where you just get it, and you don't really have to ask any more questions. Sagittarius, your mind is still buzzing. It has been buzzing for some time. I think I've mentioned this, but as you move into the weekend, it's still there. You still have a very active mind that's going in all sorts of directions, and so don't hold back. You've just got you've got a lot to offer. You've got a lot to contribute, and you're able to stir things up. And this means that your ability to communicate is really very good, and getting the words out really shouldn't be a problem. Now, you don't know how people are going to respond to what you say. That's always a mystery, isn't it? But on Saturday, particularly the beginning of Saturday, you should get quite a good response. People like what you've got to say. As the weekend continues, things could become more complicated because the moon makes an opposition to Mercury, and so moon opposition Mercury, it's a stressful aspect, and it might be about you saying too much, making one observation too many. So don't push it, and don't say more than you have to. So that is important, and think about what you're saying, because you are quite original right now, and originality works in some places but doesn't work in other places. And so make some effort, Sagittarius, to really consider your audience. There are people who are always going to think you're wonderful, and there are other people who just might very quickly realize that you're just too much to handle. So do make the right decisions, but if you get it right, I think that it should be a weekend that is quite successful. It's quite fun, and with the moon trine Venus, you can get on with people, but they've got to, as I said, they've got to be the right people, and you certainly can't get on with everyone. I think that's very important to realize, and also you need to know when to stop, and that's especially if you're in the Americas. So if you're in the Americas, then late on Sunday, the moon changes sign. It moves out of Aquarius and into Pisces. Now, if you're not in the Americas, the moon will move into Pisces tomorrow. On Monday. I think it moves into Pisces if you're in London at 1:45 in the morning on Monday. But when the moon does move into Pisces, Sagittarius, then you will find that things slow down, and it may just be a question of you say what's on your mind, you do what you feel you have to do, and then you know that enough is enough, and you can then observe how things pan out. But still, your mind is very, very active, and it's very creative and it's very original, and you don't need anyone's help, you don't need an audience to use that originality. You can do things on your own, in your own way, and you can, in the end, create something that is very special and very original. Capricorn. Capricorn, the big event this weekend is Saturn going stationary retrograde. And so, Saturn is, of course, your ruler. And it's been in Aries since the end of May, and now it's coming to a standstill. And Capricorn, you might feel that you are coming to a standstill, and I don't mean that in a negative way. Sometimes you have to stop and consider what you're doing, consider your plans, and consider where you are, and then you ask yourself, well, hold on, is this right? And maybe it's not right. Okay, you don't know for sure whether it's wrong, but at the very least, it should be reconsidered. And there's absolutely no harm in reconsideration. And that means that if you have committed yourself to a particular course of action over the last 6 weeks or since the end of May, that is absolutely not a certainty. It doesn't have to be a certainty. If you feel that you've made a wrong decision or you need more information, then that's fine. You can be open and honest about it. Okay. And I think in most cases people are going to understand. And sure, Capricorn is a sign that is known for its reliability. If it says it's going to do something, it will do it. It doesn't like to break its promises. But sometimes you have to break your promises because the conditions have changed. And this is the situation that you might be in now. So don't be afraid of making changes. Don't feel that you absolutely mustn't let someone down at any cost. You do have to think about yourself and what you need to do, and you have to think about things like money. The moon is in Aquarius. Aquarius is a sign following Capricorn, and the moon is making a trine to Venus and an opposition to Mercury, and I would regard those two aspects as being quite practical. I know that moon trine Venus might sound sort of wonderful and romantic, but it's moon in Aquarius trine Venus in Gemini, and sort of in the Capricorn chart, that indicates getting down to things. It's about making sure that everything is right, everything has been sorted out, and that might actually relate to Saturn going retrograde. You may have made decisions or started to make decisions based on your understanding of a particular set of facts, and you had kind of taken those facts for granted. But now, with moon opposition Mercury and moon trine Venus, you perhaps have a chance to look at things again. Check those facts. It won't take very long. It might take 5 minutes. You check those facts, and is it really what you expected? And if it's not what you expected, then Capricorn, it's fine. You can change your mind. And so, overall, Capricorn, you are not absolutely set on any particular course. You haven't committed yourself, and if you're not happy about something, if you have your doubts, you can pause, you can ask for more time, and if need be, you can just retreat and say sorry, but it's not working out. So I think that's positive, Capricorn, because if you get it right, then Capricorn, you're going to realize that you've actually got a lot more choices than you realized that you actually had. And also things can be changed, and you can press the back button, and you can press the reset button. Aquarius. Aquarius moon continues moving through your sign. It's moving through your sign all weekend, pretty much. Okay, if you're in the Americas, then sort of late afternoon, early evening, the moon might move into Pisces. Will move into Pisces, but for most of us, for most of the weekend, even all the weekend, the moon is in your sign. So moon in your sign, it feels good. You feel that you're in control, and you're the one making the decisions. And on Saturday, you've got the moon in Aquarius making a trine to Venus in Gemini, and that moon trine Venus is a pretty fortunate influence, and it allows you to be yourself, and you don't have to compromise. And if you are yourself, and if you are spontaneous about it, people are going to like it. They need people like you at the moment, and you'll have a good sense of fun, but only up to a point, because the moon, having made a trine to Venus, it does make an opposition to Mercury, and that moon opposition Mercury could be about something which was working well, suddenly working not quite so well. And so it could be that if you're enjoying yourself, and you're enjoying yourself maybe with other people, something spoils the party. It could be you spoiling the party, but it's probably another person. Another person just says something, and they say something, and everything changes. And what can you do? And it's about control. That's what people can do. They want to be in control, so they change the subject. They can't stand the intensity of the present, so they have to say something, and they have to get attention, and they get that. They get the attention, but they spoilt the magic. So do realize, especially when it comes to other people, that nothing lasts forever, and certainly enjoyment doesn't last forever. And it's the way it goes. It's nothing really to worry about too much. And so pack in as much as possible at the beginning of a weekend, and then sort of later on, as the moon moves into late Aquarius, things will change, and perhaps you just have to be more self-reliant. Now, one thing going on over the weekend is that Saturn is going stationary retrograde, and that's important because Saturn is your ruler. And so Saturn going stationary retrograde may be about how things can change, how optimism can switch to pessimism, how conviction can change to doubt. And there's nothing wrong with pessimism, and there's nothing wrong with doubt. We need to have doubts, because if we're 100% certain that everything is fine, that we're going in the right direction, well, that's not necessarily a healthy state of mind. And with Saturn going retrograde, you might realize that something hasn't been sorted out. You thought it had been sorted out, but then you're thinking, no, things are not necessarily secure enough. And this may say something, not just about this weekend, but over the next few months. It may be that you just have to go back to something and make sure that it is resolved in your favor. Could be something financial, something you thought you'd sorted out financially some months ago. Maybe by the end of May, you thought that was in order, and you're thinking about it again, and you're thinking, no, it isn't entirely perfect. And so you have to sort of go back, and you will have an opportunity to go back. So if you think that from a financial perspective you've missed an opportunity maybe some months ago, then it looks like you're going to have another chance to revisit it, later in the year. So it's not too late for anything, and I think Aquarius, that is an important message, and that should fill you with some optimism. Pisces, you don't have to be the life and soul of the party. I don't think you want to be the life and soul of the party. I think Pisces, you rather enjoy your own company, and you understand that you are special. I mean, we're all special, but you should regard yourself as being special, and because you regard yourself as being special, because you are special, that means that you don't have to rely too much on other people. You don't have to regard them as being super important, that your happiness depends on another person's decision. It doesn't, absolutely not. And so Pisces, do what feels right, and think about what makes you feel secure. Security is important, not just because it's necessary, but because it's enriching. And when you are in your own space, doing what you enjoy, then you're going to feel great. And that is how you should treat this weekend. And things are precious, your time is precious, and not everyone is on your wavelength. And also, Pisces, at the moment, it does seem that you're quite inspired, really inspired. Your mind is on good form. You've got all sorts of ideas. You just see things in a way that other people don't, and there are lots of realizations coming your way. You just realize one thing, and then you realize another thing, and you start to see what is possible. Beforehand, maybe a week ago you thought something was impossible, but now you're saying actually it can be done. And you don't want to spoil the excitement by talking about it, because if you talk about something, you destroy its magic. At least at the moment you would destroy its magic. And so focus on yourself, and what you can do and what you're planning, and allow yourself to be really optimistic, and avoid people in general, but particularly avoid people who are negative, who have in the past not been helpful in terms of you moving towards the achievement of your ambitions and goals. Some people, they just don't change. And so Pisces, do put yourself first, and don't think you need anyone, because right now I don't think you do. I mean, from a sort of family perspective and very close friends, I think that there are people out there, family members, close friends, who can really help you, who can give you a feeling of sort of happiness and boosted security. But we're talking about a couple of people. We're not talking about a crowd. Pisceans are not going to function very well in a crowd, and I don't think that this weekend is a great time to be celebrating anything with a large group of people, going to big parties. It's not that kind of weekend. But I think it can be a very good weekend, provided you make the right choices. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And it's now time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend of July the 12th and 13th going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 56, which is the Wanderer. And so with this hexagram, we may feel that we're not very familiar with our surroundings. We're somewhere different. It's strange territory. Or we may be involved with something that we're just not familiar with. We might be at home in very familiar territory, but something we're doing, or perhaps it's the people we're mixing with or talking to, it doesn't make sense. And this might mean that we're at a disadvantage, and one is always at a disadvantage if one doesn't know what's going on, if one is a beginner, if it's new material. And so, we do have to be very careful, especially as the bottom line moves. So the bottom line is suggesting that we simply don't have enough resources. So if you take the traveller metaphor, it's about someone travelling, but they just may not have enough money. And you do need a certain amount of money if you want to travel. I mean, that's the way it goes. When you're at home, you don't have to necessarily worry so much about all your resources. You don't have to carry everything on your back, but when you're traveling, you do. And so, whatever you're doing, even if you are at home, but doing some unusual activity, something you're not familiar with, it just occurs to you that you haven't got what it takes. It might be that you need more knowledge, you need more advice, and so you are incredibly vulnerable. But in that situation, when you are vulnerable and you want to continue, you have to be really careful. It's not a time for playing around. And I Ching makes this clear. That the traveller who trivializes things, who jokes about what they're doing, well, nothing much comes of it, if they're lucky. At worst, things could go badly wrong. So accept the situation and do what is necessary to secure it for yourself, because that does really matter. Now, bottom line moving. So bottom line does move. The broken bottom line does fix itself, and it becomes unbroken. And that means that we move to a rather more fortunate hexagram, or at least a rather more fortunate message. I don't think that the Wanderer is in itself a particularly unfortunate hexagram, but that bottom line is a problem. And we move to hexagram number 30, which is the clinging. And this hexagram represents the sun. It's a very fiery hexagram. The top three lines, the first trigram and bottom trigram, they repeat each other. And one view is it's about the sun rising twice, and it's clinging to what is important. And so clinging is about taking something seriously. So if we're involved in something that we don't really understand, we don't know what we're doing, we have to cling to what we know and to what we can trust. And that way we can get around those early problems. You have to trust something if you're the Wanderer. You begin by clinging to what you have, to what's on your back. At a later stage you can find higher some level of security. But the clinging is a fortunate hexagram, and it does indicate that we are lit up. There is some recognition in the end. So if you feel at the beginning of a weekend that you are somewhere that you don't know where you are, or you're involved in a task that you don't understand, don't panic. I mean, you could really mess things up by trivializing the situation, but just be aware that you don't have many resources, but really cling to what you have and cling to any help that is given, and in that way, things should start to improve, and as a wanderer, you can start to find your feet. And now I want to look at the astrology, and I want to start off by looking at Saturn going stationary retrograde. This is, after all, the main event of the weekend. Now, that doesn't mean to say that I'm going to say a huge amount about it, but it's not an event that I can ignore. So here is the chart for Saturn, for Saturn going retrograde, and so here it is. So it goes retrograde on Sunday at 5:08 a.m. London time. So if you're in California, it will go retrograde late on Saturday, and if you're in Australia or New Zealand, then sort of late afternoon, early evening, Saturn will go retrograde. I mean, we shouldn't necessarily worry too much, about the precise time, but Saturn has been moving through Aries, and it's been making good progress. I think it went into Aries at the end of May, and so it's now at 1 degree 56 Aries. It comes to a standstill, and this can be a change point. It can be a changeover as far as economics, the markets, and it can be quite societal, and things become clear, or else we thought we were all going in a particular direction. Saturn moving into Aries, that's how we felt. We felt we were moving into this brand new future. Things were starting to resolve, and then suddenly Saturn comes to a halt, and that means that degree, or not just a degree, the 1 degree 56 minutes, that point where Saturn goes retrograde, becomes really, really highlighted. And we therefore have to think about what is Saturn doing? Well, it's in Aries and it's conjunct Neptune, and the question might be, who is going to save us? Saturn in Aries, with Saturn in Aries, I think people are going to want leaders, and that's what they really wanted. You want leadership, and because Neptune is in Aries as well, Neptune was in Aries, in the sort of 1860s, 1870s leadership, and it was. You think about then. I mean, it was. If you're German, that's when Bismarck started to really flex his muscles and came onto the scene in a big way with Saturn in Aries, and dynamic things are about to be announced. But now that Saturn's going retrograde, we might have second thoughts of that. There might be a pause, because we have to remember that Saturn is sooner or later going to move back into Pisces. So Saturn will be back in Pisces end of August. So end of first, was it the 31st of August or the 1st of September? Saturn moves back, and then Saturn stays in Pisces until early next year. So we've got a taste of Saturn in Aries, but now we do get a break. Now, as far as what's going to happen right now, well, Saturn is very close to Neptune. I've been talking about the Saturn-Neptune conjunction recently. I've actually had 2 videos in the last week on the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and you can see that they're really close. Saturn and Neptune are for 13 arc minutes apart, and so Neptune just tells us what Saturn is about when it comes retrograde. So I would have said that Saturn going retrograde right now is about potentially confusion, breakdown, misunderstanding, and it could be about the realization of what we got wrong, or realization of past mistakes. And like last weekend, we had the flooding in central Texas. It was quite a realization to see that water could move. A water level could rise 26 feet in 45 minutes. You didn't really think about that, and so that's Saturn conjunct Neptune. And so Saturn could actually be under a lot of pressure with this Neptune. Saturn and Aries, everything should be straightforward and normal. You think of Donald Trump thinking he can resolve things. He can create a ceasefire in Ukraine. He can create a ceasefire in Gaza. He can bring his tariffs. Simple, isn't it? And then you've got Saturn being aspected by Neptune, and it's clear that it really isn't quite so simple. And so if we're talking about Saturn going stationary retrograde, there is this question: which countries is it going to affect? Now, this is a chart set for Westminster, London, the government district of London, Westminster, and you can see that this is a sunrise chart. So Saturn goes stationary retrograde in London exactly at sunrise. So the uncertainty of Saturn going retrograde is really hit. It really hits the UK, and you think of the Starmer government. And this is a chart I've looked at quite a lot. So here is the chart for Keir Starmer becoming Prime Minister, and you will see that the ascendant is 1 degree 48 Libra. I think at 12:15 p.m. July the 5th, 2024, I think that was when he became Prime Minister, around then. So the descendant, if that time is correct, is 148 Aries. So Saturn is going stationary retrograde exactly on the descendant of the Starmer government. And that possibly says something about foreign policy, Starmer's enemies, and maybe Britain's enemies as well. And so it's not a fortunate event. And I do think that with Saturn going stationary retrograde, over the summer, the Starmer government is going to be under a great deal of pressure. And of course, the person who's going to really feel that pressure is going to be Keir Starmer, and I will be talking more about that chart and Starmer, over the next few months. And another country that I think could be affected by Saturn going stationary retrograde is, of course, the United States. So here's the United States' chart, and the United States has its IC at 103 Aries. So that means that Saturn is exactly on the United States' IC. Now, last weekend we had Neptune exactly on the United States' IC, and Neptune going stationary retrograde on July the 4th, that most special of days in the United States calendar. So Neptune goes stationary retrograde on July the 4th. So you get a flood. You get this disastrous flooding in central Texas. So Saturn is now on the United States' IC. I doubt it will be as dramatic as Neptune going on the IC, but that Neptune going stationary reminds us that we have to think about the immediate. And so Saturn on the IC could be a set of events which is challenging for the United States, which perhaps undermines its foundation, or could be the foundation of the government of the United States, or it's difficult to know how long it's going to last. But I'm just think that this is a difficult time for the United States with Saturn, really, really close to its IC, and it could be undermining. It could be about things going wrong. And Another country that might be impacted, if it's a country, I don't know how you describe it, and that is Palestine. So Palestine's was declared, its independence was declared on November the 15th, 1988. And at the time of that declaration, Mars was at 1 degree 51 Aries. So Saturn is going stationary retrograde exactly on Palestine's Mars. Now, that could be constructive. It might be that Hamas will declare a ceasefire, or are they going to do? I think they were talking about declaring a ceasefire. They say they're going to release 10 hostages as a gesture of goodwill. So that may say something about Palestine, but I would be inclined not to see this necessarily in an especially positive way. I mean, if you look at Palestine's chart, it has Mars square Saturn. In fact, it's got a Saturn-Uranus conjunction, and Mars is square Saturn, Mars is square Uranus. By the way, this declaration was actually done in Algiers, not in Palestine. It's the sort of government in opposition or in exile. I don't know what they were doing exactly in Algiers. That's where the declaration was made. But it's a problematic chart. And so Saturn hitting Palestine's Mars and square its Saturn maybe indicates that this retrograde motion, or this stationary motion, is just not going to be great for Palestine, and what the leadership is planning, and it just could all be very frustrating for them. And they try their hardest to fight, and they of course cause damage to the Israeli Defense Force, but still it doesn't bode well, I think, for Palestine, this Saturn going stationary retrograde on such a sensitive point in its horoscope. And then there is Argentina. Not the chart of Argentina itself, but the chart of its president, Javier Milei. Now, as far as Javier Milei is concerned, I don't have an opinion. Argentina was in very bad shape, and Javier Milei, of course, he's the chainsaw man who has massively cut government expenditure, and I think there's now a budget surplus in Argentina, which is quite an amazing thing, and inflation is down. So in one sense, things are looking pretty good in Argentina, but the cost of all the cuts, I was reading an article that came out recently in The Guardian about scientists who've lost their job in Argentina, scientists doing valuable research, for example, in cancer research, and how it's devastating, and how they had these frozen cell cultures and they might lose them because there's not the money to keep them going, or the scientists will have to pay out of their own pockets, and so it depends on who you talk to whether things are going well in Argentina. And Javier Milei, he has Mars at 1 degree 41 Libra, and so that means he has Saturn opposition his Mars, and he's president of Argentina. I mean, he's the head of state, he is the king, if you like. And so, what impacts Javier Milei also impacts his country. And so with Saturn opposition Mars, there could be some, real hurdles. He's already having an argument with the Senate. I think the Senate in Argentina wants to increase pensions, and he's not into that idea. And, I would guess that there's probably a lot of opposition to what he's doing, and so with Saturn opposition his Mars, he might have to deal with some of this opposition. And how difficult is it going to be? Well, Saturn is stationary retrograde opposition his Mars. The fact that it's stationary means that it stays opposition his Mars for some time, and so that could be a problem for him. And I know in some places he's got good press, in other places he's getting bad press. But I think we perhaps need to look at Argentina, over the next week, for example. So that is Saturn retrograde, and now I want to finish by turning to Ukraine. And a few days ago there was an assassination, and the man assassinated was Ivan Voronych, and Ivan Voronych was a colonel in the Ukrainian security apparatus, the SBU, and he was involved with the first department of SBU's 16th Directorate, and he was involved in covert operations, in sort of organizing acts of terrorism in Russia. That might have included assassinations. And the Ukrainians have since the war, and indeed before, since 2014, assassination has been an important method that the Ukrainian Secret Service has used, whether it's in the Donetsk, in the Donbass, and of course in Russia itself. So they have been using terrorism, assassinations, bombing opponents, both in Russia and in Ukraine. So it's just been a way that it's just been what the SBU has been doing, and there is a view that Russia has had enough. And the Russians are very good at assassinating their enemies, and maybe the Ukrainians are as well, because they sort of came from the same source, they came from the same roots. And so Ivan Voronych was assassinated. We know it's been said that he was assassinated by Russia, 99%. Sure, possibly. But of course, it could have been something going on internally, some internal power struggle, perhaps an assassination that was made to look like a Russian hit. He was hit, a man with a silencer, five shots, and it was kind of rather similar to the assassination of the killing of the helicopter pilot who defected, the Russian helicopter pilot who defected to Ukraine earlier on in the war, and he went to Spain. I think he got a €500 or $500 reward, and he was shot several times and killed in Spain. And there is a long history of the Russian intelligence agencies involved in assassination, not just in Russia or the Soviet Union, before that under the Tsars, so it's not especially unusual. And so here is his chart, and he was born, I believe, July the 19th, 1974, in Lviv, and I don't know what time he was born. Noon. I may be wrong about that, but from my researches, it seems that this is when he was born, July the 19th, 74. So he was coming up to his 51st birthday, and he was born at the time of a new moon, and he has a lot of planets in Cancer. His moon is almost certainly in Cancer. Okay, if he was born late in the day, the moon could have, very late in the day, the moon could have been in Leo. But so you can see his Cancer planets, and so Cancer, it's quite a nationalistic sign. It's quite loyal. He's been involved in this kind of work since 2014, I think, and he's gone up through the ranks sort of rapidly. And so Cancer, the idea of protecting one's country is very much there. And he has got Mercury at 7 degrees Cancer square Pluto. So having Mercury square Pluto, if you're involved in the Secret Service, organizing terrorism, assassinations, and so on, Mercury square Pluto is perfect for that. This is what Mercury does. Mercury in Cancer, it doesn't make a lot of noise, but it quietly plans behind the scenes, and maybe even having Mercury conjunct Saturn kind of helps. Mercury conjunct Saturn, sort of dark thoughts, working out what needs to be done. So I would argue that that does fit. And also look at his Chiron. Chiron is at 24 Aries. He's got Mars trine Chiron, and this reminds us that Chiron is not just about the wounded healer, or you could say, well, he's the wounded intelligence officer, or the killed intelligence officer. But Mars trine Chiron is about force. It's about violence and doing things differently with violence. And if you take Chiron as the maverick, being the maverick in the way you use force, assassinations, terrorism, so this might be the dark side of Chiron, but it all comes easily to him. And you've almost got a grand if you count Chiron and a node, you could say there's North Node in Sagittarius, Mars is in Leo, and Chiron is in Aries, so that's kind of all fits together. And he's got Chiron opposition Uranus. So Chiron opposition Uranus is someone who wants to do stuff, who wants to create a stir, and he's got a T-square. He's got potentially the moon as well, but certainly the Sun square Uranus, Sun square Chiron, and so Chiron opposition Uranus. He feels he has to sort of assert himself, make a difference, be different, by using violence, and by planning violence, and by planning covert operations. And as far as his horoscope is concerned, I've already mentioned the things that we can directly see. He does have Sun conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint. So Sun on a Venus-Mars midpoint, that may say something about his personality. He maybe is quite charismatic. Not everyone may appreciate his charisma, but perhaps his charisma has helped him and climb through the ranks of the SBU. And I would think that there are probably some people who think that he's really wonderful, and someone who really is an effective leader. And I'm sure there are a lot of people who are very loyal to him. And additionally, he has Jupiter aspecting his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So here is his Mars and Saturn. So Jupiter is making a sesquiquadrate to his Mars-Saturn midpoint. So Mars-Saturn as a pair is, or can be, about death and destruction and causing death and destruction. And so if you have got Jupiter aspecting your Mars-Saturn midpoint, you could say that is reveling in death and destruction. You enjoy causing death and destruction. It's part of your work. And if you look at his 90-degree dial, let's look at that. His 90-degree dial. Where's his Jupiter gone? Where's Jupiter? I've lost it. Oh, I really have lost it. Oh no, there it is. Okay, there's his Jupiter. You see he's got Jupiter square the nodal axis. So how he uses his energy really does matter. He has perhaps got a lot of energy at his disposal. So there's Jupiter, and you can see it's on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. It's quite closely on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So Jupiter on the Mars-Saturn is, someone could revel in causing death and destruction. It can happen, and if you're doing that kind of job, he enjoys his work, and so that's him. And Jupiter is aspecting the nodes, the nodal axis as well. So those are a few things about his horoscope, and then there is the horoscope of his death. And so here's a chart of his assassination, and I'm reasonably confident that I've got this right. So the video of the assassination, one doesn't really want to look at an assassination. I was really looking at the timestamp. So as far as I could see, the timestamp for the assassination was 9:04 a.m. I've looked elsewhere on the internet, and some people were saying he was assassinated at 8 or between 8 and 9 or around 9 o'clock, but the actual CCTV video is showing 9:04 a.m. So that's what I'm sort of going for. And so, that means that 1 degree 28 Virgo was rising at the time of his death. And so that rising degree is important for a number of reasons, but just looking at I'll mention that in a moment. But if you look, Uranus is exactly square the ascendant, and so that tells us something important. If there is a sort of Uranus on the midheaven feel to that chart, certainly if we were using a sort of the equal house system, it would sort of have a Uranus on the midheaven feel to it. Okay, the Uranus is quite far removed from the midheaven itself, but it is square the ascendant, and so this reminds us that Uranus has gone into Gemini, and there are some people saying that this assassination of Ivan Voronych represents a new phase in the war. Russia had held back from this kind of operation, but now they might be really going for it, assuming Russia did kill him. We can't necessarily make that assumption. It could be that someone was doing it to make it look like a Russian hit. And so Uranus is very very prominent in this chart, and he was killed in the run-up to a full moon. And so you've got someone who was born at the time of a new moon in Cancer, who was killed during a Capricorn full moon, just before his birthday, and I'll look at his transits in a moment, because he was killed on his Chiron return, but I'll mention that in a moment. So if you think about the sun and the moon, the midpoint of the sun and the moon is approximately 15 cardinal, and so 15 cardinal. What does that say? It tells us that Uranus, at the time of the assassination, was semi-square the Sun-Moon midpoint. So that's one thing. But it wasn't just Uranus that was semi-square the Sun-Moon midpoint. And so let me put up some hypothetical planets. And so if we put the hypothetical planets into the equation, we then see that Hades was at 1425 Cancer. So in other words, Hades and Uranus were on the Sun-Moon midpoint. So what better way of describing an assassination? Hades, Uranus aspecting the Sun-Moon midpoint. The Sun-Moon is the time and the place, and Uranus is about a sudden action, sudden hit. Hades is about death. So I think that is that's quite impressive astrology, especially given that with Uranus, Uranus is important at 0 degrees Aries. But I just want to firstly look at because it links with the Ukraine chart. But let's just start off with his transits, and what kind of transits did he have at the time. So here are the transits that Voronych had. So there's his Chiron at 24-28 Aries, and so Chiron was he had his Chiron return when he was assassinated, and an interesting transit which doesn't really make sort of immediate sense, at least not in sort of symbolic classical astrology or classic modern Western astrology, however you want to see it, is that he had Jupiter conjunct his Mercury. So Jupiter was at 6:55 Cancer when he was assassinated, and so it was exactly on his Mercury. You don't normally associate Jupiter conjunct Mercury with assassination, do you? But in this case, that seems to be the closest aspect, and that might say something about what else he was doing. You could argue, what would he be doing with Jupiter conjunct Mercury? What was he planning? What was he working on? And maybe this was a culmination of something he was working on. Someone knew it was a culmination. So maybe that's why he got killed. But doesn't take away from the fact that chances are, in terms of what everyone is saying, that it's most likely that it was the Russians that killed him. But there just might have been something else going on that Jupiter conjunct Mercury is hinting at. And there was a short-lived lunar from a lunar point of view. The Moon was just making an opposition to Saturn when that happened. So there was that aspect, and Pluto, transiting Pluto, was pretty close to his true black moon Lilith. So true black moon Lilith would be the darkness of his profession, and Pluto was revealing the full darkness of his profession, which was, of course, manifested by his own death. And it's always good to look at solar arc directions. So very quickly, solar arc direction. So he was about 50, he was just before his 51st birthday when he was assassinated. So you move everything in his chart around 50 degrees. So here are his solar arc directions. And the main solar arc direction that he experienced when he was assassinated, remember, I don't have a time of birth for him, but still the thing that comes to mind is Neptune, which is, Neptune was at 26 Capricorn. So Neptune was pretty much exactly opposition his sun. So you could say Neptune opposition his sun represents his death. That is a possible manifestation of it. And he does in his natal chart have Sun square Uranus. So Neptune had, a few years ago, perhaps at the beginning of the war, was square his Uranus, and now Neptune has moved on, has made the opposition to his Sun, and there could have been a mistake on his part. He'd misunderstood something, or Neptune could just be seen as a malefic, and that is what has happened. And then this is possibly an important event, just not for Voronych, but also for Ukraine. And I haven't looked at Ukraine's horoscope for some time, but here is Ukraine's chart. I've got Ukraine's chart somewhere. So Ukraine has got its sun at 0 degrees 56 Virgo. And of course, it declared its independence on August the 24th, 1991. Interestingly, NATO was ratified on August the 24th, 1949. So NATO also has its sun at 0 degrees Virgo. So that sun, Ukraine's sun, is being hit by Uranus, and so the moment Uranus moved into Gemini, it was starting to make a square to Uranus's sun. So if we compare compare Ukraine to the death of the colonel, it may be potentially quite an important event, because it is a reminder that something has changed. Uranus is now moving towards a square of Ukraine's sun, and of course Ukraine has its sun in the 8th house, and so that's one aspect of it. Notice that Jupiter is moving towards Ukraine's descendant. So that does indicate that the war is there's going to be a change in the war pretty soon. And look at the moon. The moon was at 11 degrees at the time of the assassination. The moon was at 11:06 Capricorn. So the moon was crossing Ukraine's sun. So that's it. That's something that we do need to think about. Now, who committed this crime? Well, one possibility is Russia. And if we look at the horoscope of the FSB, so the FSB is the successor organization to the KGB, and the FSB has its Mercury at 1 degree 53 Aries. I mean, I don't know what time exactly the FSB was signed into existence. Yeltsin signed something on April the 3rd, 1995, which created the FSB. And so with Saturn going stationary direct on FSB's Mercury, this may say something about the assassination, but it also might say something about the FSB. Maybe the FSB has got its own problems with Saturn on its Mercury. So Saturn on its Mercury, the FSB would be thinking about, what it's trying to achieve. Maybe there's been a reverse for the FSB, but I don't know how the FSB is going to relate to having Saturn opposition its Mercury. Notice also that the FSB has Pluto at 0 degrees Sagittarius. So with the Pluto at 0 degrees Sagittarius, so Uranus is now opposition the FSB's Pluto. So and look at this. The FSB has got its Uranus at 0 degrees Aquarius, and so Uranus, as it goes into Gemini, this is maybe when the FSB feels it needs to expand its reach and move into new areas. So Uranus trine the FSB's Uranus, did sort of link up with the assassination. So that might be an indication that the FSB or people involved with the SFB were connected with it. But I mean, I'm not quite sure how these various agencies work. Maybe it's a different agency that's involved in assassinations. I don't know. And Ukraine has its own intelligence agency, which is one thing. I mean, it's just a speculation. The very first Russian intelligence agency with the fall of the Tsar, connected with the communists, was by the way, the Cheka. The Cheka was sort of notorious with this in the Russian Civil War, and they were pretty violent. And the Cheka has its Pluto at 4 degrees 37 Cancer, and you might argue that modern Russia, post-revolutionary Russia, I mean, since the fall of the Tsars, the first attempt to create an intelligence agency was the Cheka. And so maybe the horoscope of the Cheka remains relevant. And so the Cheka, with its Pluto at 4 degrees 37 Cancer, there was a new moon at 4 degrees on June the 25th at 4, and there was a new moon conjunct Jupiter, which was conjunct the Pluto of the Cheka. And so maybe this is stirring up old memories, something that very much is linked to the government and the security apparatus. And this now needs to up the pace of things. And it could be that we could link this assassination with the checkers chart and the new moon hitting Pluto on a checkers chart. But I'm probably clutching at straws. I think I'm probably reading too much into things. But looking at the chart of the SBU, so the SBU was founded on September the 20th, 1991, and with Uranus conjunct true black moon Lilith. That's a wonderful aspect, and it kind of tells us so much. If you have got an organization that is involved in assassinations, terrorism, acts of sabotage, then Uranus conjunct true black moon Lilith really does fit. It's kind of rather sort of spectre-like, isn't it? And so that describes its work, you could say. The SBU's Uranus conjunct true black moon Lilith. Now they have lost one of their officers. You would have thought this would be an embarrassment for the SBU. I mean, I did look for a few transits. I didn't find any transits that were particularly telling. I mean, Mars was moving towards a conjunction of its Mercury, so Mars conjunct Mercury could be potentially about the recriminations as a result of this assassination. What's going on in the SBU now? They're having to work out how this man was assassinated, what happened. Now, the SBU does have its Saturn at 0 degrees 22 Aquarius, so that kind of links with the FSB. Remember, the FSB has its Uranus at 0 degrees Aquarius. So the FSB and the SBU have this kind of link, and so transiting Uranus at 0 degrees Gemini was trine the SBU's Saturn. A reminder that trines are not necessarily a fortunate event. Uranus was sort of attacking the foundations of the SBU. It's a good Saturn. I mean, Saturn's in Aquarius, but it is retrograde. It is retrograde in Aquarius. So those are a few charts to consider. I mean, there's clearly something going on, and it's probably connected with Uranus moving into Aquarius, and it's quite possible that this assassination in Kiev is just the beginning of something. Uranus moving into Gemini, perhaps Uranus making a trine to the FSB's Sun and just bringing something out, making it expand its operations. Or you might want to take it further, and maybe it's darker than that, and it relates to the Pluto in the Cheka's 1917 horoscope. So that's all I want to say on the subject of this assassination. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.